Well, fall is the perfect time to start a compost pile. If you've never had one before, or if you're just in the practice of composting already, you know that as we start to clean all of this extra plant material off of the garden and also get the leaves and the lawn clippings together, we've got a lot of stuff that can be composted instead of carried out to the curb and sent to the landfill. Now, when you first hear the term composting, if you've never done it before, it can sound a little bit overwhelming. But really, compost happens naturally. You've heard that term, compost happens. Well, it's absolutely true. It's basically the processes involved breaking down organic matter and returning all of that to the soil. And it's going to happen no matter what, whether it's laying on the ground or if it's in a nice, neat pile. The thing about it is there are some things that you can do that can speed up the whole process. Now right here we have a very large quote-unquote compost pile, and you can see we've got all sorts of stuff in here. We've got grass clippings, we've got trimmings off of trees, we also have trimmings out of our garden, and it's just basically here in a big pile. This is because we've got so much organic matter. Now even though we don't turn this or anything, it's just all sitting here. As you dig down into this pile, and we can go down here through our grass clippings, you can see that things are starting to happen, and it is indeed starting to break down. In fact, right down in here, we've got some nice humus already starting to form. So we just leave this here and it will go ahead and compost for us. However, in a situation in town when you don't have a whole lot of room, this really isn't practical. And another downside of this is that this type of composting can develop a smell. So we're going to look at some ways to speed up the process and also keep it a little bit neater. Now, one of the first things that you can do to speed up the composting process is to place your compost materials in a pile. Now, the pile really should be about 4 feet tall by 4 feet wide minimum. That's because that allows the materials inside to heat up and really start to compost well. If your pile is smaller than that, then it will take much longer for your compost to break down. So 4 feet by 4 feet is a good size to start with, all the way up to about 6 feet by 6 feet. The problem with a pile like that is if you don't have something to contain it in, it starts to spread out all over the place and you won't have room for it in your own yard. So the next step is to build some type of a bin to put compost in. Now this is actually a pretty elaborate 3-bin composter here with wood, and we've also got wire here on the sides. But you don't have to build something like this. In fact, just a square this size or even a circle composter does very well. You can use chicken wire, you could use pallets that are extra from the stores. You can put them together on all 4 sides and have a pallet composter. You can also use cattle panels, and you can even use bales of hay and stack those up and compost inside of the bales of hay. So anything that you can use that can allow some air to come through the sides and still hold your organic material in the middle is good to use to compost with. Now, once we've got our container for it, the next thing is to provide the things that are needed to actually speed up the composting process. And one of the first things is air. Air is required, and that's why we like the sides here to be open. You can see we've got slats here with air spaces here. And also at the bottom, which over here in one of our empty bins, we've placed a pallet. Now, while this pallet's pretty old and is actually fallen prey to the compost process itself, it still gets the compost up off the ground and lets air come through the bottom. Another way that you can accomplish this, if you don't have a ready source for pallets, is to pile some brush in the bottom of that and then pile your compost on top of that, and that will serve the same purpose. It'll let some air get through there. The other thing that's required is moisture. You need to check the moisture in your compost pile after you've got it built, and even as you're building it, to make sure that you've got enough moisture present. Now, this particular compost pile here is really pretty dry on the top. You can see it's very crumbly. We don't have much moisture in here. But as we look down underneath, it's got quite a bit of moisture in here. And in fact, is about the right consistency. What you need to have is the consistency of a wrung out sponge. So if you can squeeze your compost and water doesn't come gushing out, but it does stick together like this, then it's just right. If water's gushing out, then it's too wet, and if it's like this on top, then it's too dry. Now, a way to combat the top of your compost drying out is to put a cover over your compost. You could even put a covering of straw over the top, pull that back, add materials, and then put that back over the top, and that will help keep this pile evenly moist. The other thing that we need is the food, quote unquote, of the microorganisms. That's the nitrogen and the carbon. And those need to be available in a 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen ratio or lower, so that the microorganisms can work in the pile. If it's higher than that, say if you had a pile completely made of sawdust, which is about 500 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen, it's going to take a really long time for that to break down because there's just not enough nitrogen there for the microorganisms. You have to add some fertilizer, nitrogen fertilizer, to that to help the process. The other thing that can speed the composting process is to actually chop up your materials. See, in here we've got quite a few larger twigs and stuff. If we had a chipper shredder, that would work great because our microorganisms have smaller pieces to basically break down. Now right here we have a pile of grass clippings, which is very common this time of year if you don't have a mulching mower to have a pile of grass clippings. Now we could leave these in a pile and they would eventually break down. But one of the problems with a pile of grass clippings is that they're so high in nitrogen that they tend to develop a really foul odor very quickly. The other thing is they tend to mat down and exclude air, and so they don't compost as quickly as we would like them. The thing to do is to add some dry matter or brown matter to this, and we'll get a lot better composting process when we mix that up. Now, a good source of dry or brown matter would be leaves that we're getting this fall. If we chip those up, add them in with our grass clippings, that works very well. Now, a ratio of about 10 buckets of leaves to about 4 buckets of grass clippings is a really good mix to get composting quickly. Now, as I'm talking about leaves, which are very high in carbon, you can have a whole lot of leaves available in the fall and maybe not as many green grass clippings. What you can do, you can mix them with 5 parts of leaves to 1 part fresh manure, since you don't have grass clippings available, and that again will really help your leaves to compost a lot faster. Now, when you do put your materials in the compost pile when you're first starting out, again, you want to have something underneath like a pallet or a pile of brush to add some air there, and then start in layers and add a layer of green and then a layer of brown materials like your clippings from your trees that have been chipper shredded. You can also use your chipped or shredded leaves. Anything brown is basically your carbon materials, and alternate those in the pile. The other thing that you want to do is ever so often throw a shovelful of garden soil into that mix. About every layer that you do, 1 green layer, 1 brown layer, shovelful of garden soil, and then start over with a green layer, brown layer, shovelful of garden soil. And that will help that get mixed up. Now, you can just leave that there. You never have to turn it. It will eventually break down. However, if you want to speed up the process again, you can turn that pile and mix that all in together so it's distributed better, and it will compost a lot faster. Now, with proper turning and proper ratios, you can actually get new ready-to-use compost in about a month. However, if you don't want to do anything to it at all, you can just pile it up, and in 6 months to a year, you'll have just as nice compost. You won't have to have done anything to it, but you just need the space to let it break down. Now, if you're interested in learning more about composting, or you want to become a compost connoisseur, there's a book known as The Composter's Bible, and it is the Rodale Book of Composting. Now, this book is wonderful because if you want to get into the finer points of composting, build a 3-bin composter or any other type of composter that might fit into your own gardening scheme, this has plans for that. It also has recipes for compost when you get down to the finer points, knowing just how much carbon material to put in and just how much nitrogen material to put in to really get your compost working quickly. So anyway, if you're interested in all about composting, get yourself a copy of the Rodale Book of Composting because it's a great resource. And be sure to start yourself a compost pile this fall, because even if you don't do anything except pile up the materials, you'll be well pleased with the results.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic